Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Today I've got for you a few really creepy cult encounters I found on Reddit. So, as always, make yourself nice and cozy, grab a drink and let's get into them already.
This is a true story. My encounter with a terrifying cult in the woods.
This happened 5 years ago in Northern California, but I won't provide more details. Feel free to ask questions. My name is Sarah, and the night my friend Emily and I stumbled upon a terrifying cult in the woods was supposed to be a fun adventure. Emily's then boyfriend had recommended the forest to us, having hiked there before. I had just moved from my home country in Europe to the US 1 year earlier because I met an American guy who had been studying in my country. Despite being an avid hiker and having explored trails in various parts of Europe and Asia, I never expected that this hike would turn into a nightmare. As a blonde girl with blue eyes, I've had my fair share of experiencing weird things and dangerous situations while hiking. But what we encountered that night was like something out of a Hollywood movie. None of us had ever been there before, but we had heard that it was beautiful and peaceful. As we hiked deeper into the woods, we saw more and more of these symbols etched into the landscape. They seemed to be guiding us towards the ritual site, as if they were making the path to something important. It was an eerie feeling, as if we were trespassing in a sacred place that we didn't belong. I researched the meaning of the symbols later on, but it was difficult to say. They didn't seem to be connected to any specific religion or cult, but rather a product of some mystic or spiritual belief. It was as if they had been created by someone with a deep understanding of both geometry and mysticism. Looking back on it now, it's hard not to think about how strange those symbols were and what kind of belief system they might have represented. It was clear that the people performing the ritual took them very seriously and that they were an integral part of their practice. But for us, they were nothing more than mysterious etchings on the trees and rocks at the time. We certainly noticed them and thought they were odd, but we didn't pay much attention. We were too busy enjoying the beauty of nature around us, and the symbols seemed like just another part of the scenery. It wasn't until we heard the chanting that we realized something was wrong. Intrigued and curious, we followed the sound, hoping to see what was going on. But we certainly didn't expect to find a group of people dressed in black robes performing a ritual around a large fire. It was something straight out of the movie. The chanting grew louder and more intense, but we couldn't make out the words. The cultists, around 20 in number, were all clad in black robes, some with peculiar symbols painted on their faces and others donning eerie masks. They encircled the towering bonfire, the flames leaping high into the night sky, casting a flickering orange glow across the sinister faces. In front of the fire stood an altar, adorned with flickering candles and other peculiar objects. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I watched in disbelief as one of the cultists produced a white rabbit and proceeded to sacrifice it on the altar. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and one of the cultists approached the fire with a small wooden box from within his robes. He opened it, revealing a vial containing an unknown substance, which he carefully dripped onto the flames. Suddenly, my eyes were drawn to a figure on a table near the altar, a woman. Her body painted with intricate designs, lay still with her eyes closed, breathing gently, as if in a deep slumber. The cultists around the fire were swaying in unison, holding candles aloft as if entranced by some dark magic. As the chanting grew louder still, the woman on the table began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, and she sat up, looking around with a vacant expression. The cultists began to approach her, their faces twisted in ecstasy, as if they were under some kind of spell. All of a sudden, the woman let out a piercing scream and fell back onto the table, her body writhing in agony. The cultists dispersed, their faces now twisted in frustration and disappointment, as if the ritual had somehow failed. As they wandered around in confusion, one of them spotted us and the rest of the cultists turned their attention towards us. They looked angry, as if they blamed us for interrupting their ceremony. I could feel their menacing stares as they began to approach us. their black robes billowing in the wind. We ran as fast as we could, but they were always right behind us. I don't think we can outrun them, Emily gasped. We need to find somewhere to hide. I nodded in agreement and scanned our surroundings frantically. That's when we spotted an old cabin up ahead. We ran inside and slammed the door shut, hoping it would hold. We could hear the cultists pounding on the door, and we knew it was only a matter of time before they broke through. We searched the cabin for any weapons we could find, and that's when we found an old axe. We knew it wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Huddled together, ready to defend ourselves, when suddenly we heard yelling outside, followed by the sound of wolves howling close by. It was an eerie sound that sent chills down our spines. We didn't know if it was a good or bad sign, but at least the cultist had stopped pounding on the door. We were terrified, but we finally mustered the courage to peek outside. To our shock, the cultists were gone, and there was no sign of them. It was like they had vanished into thin air. We stayed in the cabin a few hours until we decided to make a run for it, back to our car. We knew it was a risk, but we couldn't stay in the cabin forever. We opened the door cautiously, ready to bolt if we saw any sign of the cultists. We ran as fast as we could through the woods. We kept moving, trying to stay on the path we had taken earlier. We didn't know how long we had been running, but our legs were starting to feel like jelly. We kept running. The dense forest started to thin out, and we could see a clearing up ahead. Just as we thought we had made it, we saw them. The cultists emerged from the tree line, their eyes fixated on us like predators. The sight of their black robes and masks made my blood run cold. They were holding long, sharp knives in their hands, glinting menacingly in the dappled sunlight. We skidded to a stop, our hearts racing in our chest. But just as they were about to close in on us, we heard a gunshot ring out. The cultists paused for a moment, startled, and we took the opportunity to run past them. As we looked back, we saw a figure emerge from a cabin up on a hill. The cabin was surrounded by a cleared radius of trees, presumably to prevent wildfires. The figure was dressed in a ranger's uniform, holding a gun in their hand. They shouted out a warning to the cultists, who seemed to think better of pursuing us any further. We kept running until we were sure we were out of danger. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for air and shaking with fear. We explained everything to the ranger, and he quickly called for backup. The police took our statements. We led them back to the cabin where we had taken refuge. The officers searched the area, but they found no trace of the cultists. They told us that they would continue their investigation and that we should go home and stay safe. Emily and I got into our car, still trembling from the adrenaline and fear. We drove back to our homes, grateful to be alive but still shaken by what had happened. Over the next few days, we followed the news closely, hoping for any updates on the cult and their whereabouts. But there was no news, and the incident seemed to be forgotten. Months passed, and Emily and I tried to move on from the terrifying experience, but every time we went into the woods or heard a strange noise, we couldn't help but remember that night. One day, we both received a letter in the mail. It was a handwritten note, with no return address. I opened it cautiously, unsure of what to expect. The letter read, "We know what you saw, and we know what you heard, but you should know that you are not safe. We are always watching, and we will come for you." Emily and I were terrified once again, and we immediately called the police. They assured us that they would investigate and take the letter as evidence material. However, we knew that the handwriting couldn't be recognized as belonging to any specific person, since it appeared to be deliberately messy and inconsistent, almost as if the author had written it with their non-dominant hand. We hoped that the police would be able to catch the person responsible, but we knew that it would be difficult with such little evidence. We knew we couldn't rely on the police alone. We started taking self-defense classes and installed security cameras around our homes. We never went into the woods again and always carried some form of protection with us. One becomes paranoid after such an experience, especially after receiving that letter. It felt like people were following me, strange individuals who just stood and stared. But whether it was just my imagination, I'm not sure. Years passed, and we never heard from the cult again, but we couldn't help but wonder if one or more of the cultists knew us. They must have obtained our addresses from somewhere, and it made us feel uneasy. After receiving multiple reports of strange noises and suspicious activity in the woods, the police and rangers collaborated to increase patrols in the area. This led to the arrest of 3 individuals who were suspected of being involved in illegal activities, such as drug trafficking and animal cruelty. During the raid, the police found evidence of animal remains and drug paraphernalia, which confirmed their suspicions about the involvement of these individuals in criminal activities. They were charged with multiple offenses, including animal cruelty, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit illegal acts. Despite the best efforts of the police and other authorities, the investigation into the strange incidents in the woods and the incidents involving us continued for several months. However, the investigation was eventually closed, as they were unable to find any concrete evidence linking the arrested to these incidents. The strange incidents in the woods stopped, but the fact that most of the cultists were still free and at large left many questions unanswered and was unsettling. It was unclear if they had disbanded or if they were continuing their activities elsewhere. The police remained vigilant and continued to monitor the area, but there were no further reports of suspicious activity or strange occurrences. The incident remained a mystery, and the true intentions of the cultists and the full extent of their activities were unknown. It was a sobering reminder that there were still groups out there operating in secrecy, and that we may never know the full extent of their actions. From what was discovered, it appeared that the group was attempting to summon some sort of spiritual entity or deity, using various objects such as candles, incense, and herbs. It was speculated that the cultists may have been practicing some form of neo-pagan or occult religion, though this was never confirmed. Some of the objects found at the site suggested a connection to ancient religions or mythologies, though it was unclear if these were authentic artifacts or simply replicas. Overall, the specifics of the ritual remained a mystery, as the arrested individuals denied any involvement and refused to divulge any information about their activities. Looking back, I still can't believe that I had never heard of the cult before. It's scary to think that such a dangerous group could be operating right under our noses, without anyone knowing. As much as I wanted to forget that night, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the fortunate events that allowed us to escape unharmed, despite the potential danger we faced that night. The thought of what might have happened if the cultists had managed to enter the cabin still sends shivers down my spine. And then the ranger showed up just in time to save us from the 2 others. If it weren't for these fortunate events, who knows what could have happened to us. It was as if fate had intervened to protect us from harm, or as some higher power was looking out for us that night. We later learned about superstitions surrounding the woods we were in, strange happenings and unusual occurrences in these parts. Some even believed that the forest was cursed and those who entered were doomed to suffer misfortune. Perhaps the cultists themselves were aware of these superstitions and were afraid of what might happen if they continued their pursuit. Maybe they had some superstition around the cabin, or maybe they had encountered something even more terrifying than they had bargained for. Wolves don't normally attack people, let alone a group of 20 armed individuals. So why should the cultists be scared? As for the wolves, it's possible that their howling had some significance in the local folklore and the cultists were wary of disturbing them. It's also possible that the wolves simply act as a deterrent, scaring off the cultists with their pack mentality and aggressive behavior. Perhaps it was the sheer number of wolves that made the cultists back off, or maybe it was the unexpectedness of the situation. As for the yelling, it could have been a disagreement between the cultists themselves. The weird part is that the cultists didn't come back to the cabin. We waited anxiously for a while, wondering if they would return, but they never did. And then the next day, we encountered 2 cultists in broad daylight. It didn't seem like they had been running, and they were coming from the opposite direction of where we had fled. We hadn't seen anyone following us, and we had run so fast that it seemed unlikely that they could have caught up to us. It was a strange and unsettling experience that left us with more questions than answers, and the mystery surrounding the events only added to the eerie atmosphere of the forest. But one thing was certain. We survived an encounter that could have easily ended in tragedy, and for that, we were fortunate. I don't hike anymore. The thought of being out in the woods and encountering the unknown was no longer thrilling, but terrifying. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, of being followed. What did the cultists want with us? Did someone know us? Was the letter only meant to scare us? Are we still in danger? These questions will still haunt me to this day. As time passed, We went back to our normal lives and eventually moved out of the area. Night in the woods was a wake-up call for me, a reminder to always stay vigilant, aware, and never underestimate the dangers that could be lurking. Who knows what other dangers are out there, waiting to be discovered.
I survived a cult.
Submitted by FMO JP. When I was around 7 years old, my mom and dad started bringing me and my younger sister to a new church. We originally lived in Charleston, West Virginia, but moved when my dad lost his job as a construction worker, probably due to his drinking. I remember for about a week after my dad lost his job, him and my mom would be constantly fighting about what they were gonna do and how they were gonna get out our family through this, especially since my mom was pregnant and was due to give birth to my brother in a month or so. My dad walked in one day and said we needed to move and he knew the answer to all our problems. We picked up everything and moved to the middle of the state to a small town called Clay, West Virginia. It was a change from what we were used to, for sure. West Virginia is made up of a lot of small, sleepy towns inhabited by your stereotypical country/hill folk that were either nice as could be or very cold and hating to outsiders. Sadly, it's usually the latter, and Clay was definitely one of these towns. Granted, Charleston isn't the biggest city with around 40,000 people, but by West Virginia standards, that's basically New York City. So this move to the middle of nowhere was definitely an adjustment. The whole way driving over, I remember my dad having a big grin on his face like he was a kid in a candy store excited to show us our new lives. Him and my mom obviously did some talking the night before we left, and she seemed a little less apprehensive about the whole situation than when he first dropped the bomb. I should say that where we were moving to wasn't a regular house or apartment in Clay. I now understand that this place was a compound out in the outskirts. Pulling up to the massive fenced-in area, me and my sister looked at each other confused about our new living arrangements. "What is this place?" I asked my parents. "Yeah, Tim, this isn't like what you were telling me last night," my mom said in a confused tone. "I know it looks a little off, Susan, but trust me, I already checked this place out and you'll love it when you see how nice it is inside," my dad said gleefully. We pulled up to the gate where a man stood outside with a rifle in his hand. Now I know to the average person this would set off huge red flags, but keep in mind that the area we were in was not the uncommon of a sight to see a man walking out with a shotgun or rifle through town, into stores, or having a rack on the back of their pickup truck. The man came to our window, and my dad told the man to let Father Williams know that the Landry family has arrived. The man radioed in and opened the gate for us to drive in. Driving to the compound was like driving into a different world entirely. The main road we drove on was lined with wooden cottages all closely built right next to each other on each side. Families were outside having barbecues, laughing and smiling, and kids were running around playing games. This looked almost like the picture-perfect suburban neighborhood. It was far different from the neighborhood that me and my sister were accustomed to, and we were already looking forward to meeting all the other kids around our new home. Passing by what looked like endless rows of copy and paste homes, we parked outside of a giant 4-story concrete building. A tall, pasty white bald man wearing aviator sunglasses and all-white robe stood outside the doors with a large car salesman-like smile, and his arms wide open. We open the doors and get out of the car. He walks up to us and introduces himself. "It's a pleasure to meet your beautiful family, finally, Tim." Father Williams pulled my father in close for a handshake. "Yes, Steve, I mean, Father Williams, this is my loving wife Susan and my kids I was telling you about." "Oh, the lovely Susan I've heard so much about. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Tim talked so highly of you when we met." Father Williams approached my mother and brought her into a deep, embracing hug that lingered on a little too long. "It's nice to meet you, Father. Tim has a lot of good things to say about you. He says that you basically saved his life from the way he was talking you up the other night," my mom says in her southern charm way she would always put on when meeting new company. "Well, when I met your husband that night, I could just tell that he needed the Lord to step in and bless him with his all-forgiving spirit, and I'm just glad he was willing to accept," he said in his very powerful preaching voice with his hands held high and head pointing towards the sky. He lowered his hands and his head and fixed his gaze on me and my sister. "Now, who are you two wonderful gifts from our Lord?" he said, getting onto one knee to get closer to mine and my sister's level with a very off-putting grin. I'm Austin. It's nice to meet you, Father Williams, I said, almost as though I was addressing a drill sergeant. And how old are you, Austin? He responded with a sultry voice. I'm 7, I responded. That's great. And now, you little miss, what is your name? He lightly poked my sister on the nose while smiling. My sister giggled. My name is Mary, and I'm 3 years old, she said with her head tilted while swaying back and forth with joy and innocence. It's very nice to meet you too. I do look forward to getting to know the both of you more. Now, Landry family, I welcome you to our humble land that we like to call Canaan, Father Williams said while taking a bow. We'll be staying in cottage 145. You will see it's a lovely little home just like all other members in one of the cul-de-sacs off of our main road, he said to my parents. Thank you, Father, it is a pleasure meeting you, my mother said, looking deeply appreciative into Father William's sunglass-covered eyes. It's my pleasure now. Go settle into your new home and welcome to Canaan, Father Williams said with a cheesy smile, then turned around and walked back into his big concrete church building. The house was decently sized, 3 bedroom, 1 bathroom, small kitchen and living room, but it was really nice compared to our old apartment in Charleston. I remember I was happy to have my own room to myself and didn't have to share it with my brat little sister, but that didn't last long because eventually I had to share it with my brother when he was born. The neighbors were all so friendly, and I remember all of us kids in the compound would meet up at the playground every day after the sermons hosted by Father Williams. There was about 120 of us kids, all of us varying ages in the compound, and we would all play games like tag and hide and go seek, and even a game that me and my sister never played called Kill the Sinner. 3 kids would be the sinner and the rest of kids playing would chase down the 3 sinners and drag them back to the top of the jungle gym, where they would made to be stand there next to each other with their arms stretched out and then forced to say, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, then jump from the top of the jungle gym into the sandpit below. The game always ended in laughs and of course the occasional broken arm from the fall, which wasn't so funny, but still good times looking back on it. Years later, when I was 12 years old, my sister 8, and my new brother Caleb was 5, we all adjusted to life in the compound. We never left. He had no need to. My parents would always be outside chatting with the neighbors, having dinners, or grilling and having a few drinks together, except for my dad. He gave up drinking when we moved to the compound, but still would chat and hang out with neighbors all the same, while my siblings and the neighbor kids would all hang out and play games ourselves. One day, while we were all playing, one of the neighbor's kids named Alex brought up something rather disturbing that even my 12-year-old self knew something was up. Alex was 6 years old, and this is what he said. Father Williams brought me into his room earlier to play just me and him. Lucky, I wish I could go play with Father Williams, my sister said jealously. What did you and Father Williams play? I asked, confused why a grown man would want to play a game with a little kid like Alex all alone. We played rock, paper, scissors, and the loser had to take off a piece of their clothes, he said matter-of-factly. What? I said, shocked at the statement. Yup, I won some of them, but I ended up losing in the end, he said. I was at a loss for words hearing this. I didn't even know what to say when he spoke up again. After we played, he told me to have my sister come in and play with him alone. She must have lost because she ran out crying after a while, he said bluntly. Alex's sister was 14 years old. I want to play with Father Williams, my sister said while bouncing a ball. No! I screamed, and all the kids around us went silent and stared at me. I ran back inside and closed the door to my room behind me. I didn't understand exactly what was going on, but I knew it wasn't right. I told my parents what Alex said, and they looked at each other confused. Why would that Johnson kid make up such a thing like that? My dad said, confused. I know, right? He doesn't seem like the kind of kid to make up crazy stories like that, my mom said. He must get it from his father. You know, Zach and his old college stories, my dad says, and both my parents share a hearty laugh. I'm serious, Mom and Dad, I say sternly. Austin, I wouldn't think too much about it. The kid is 6, he's probably just making up stories for attention. My dad says, and my mom nods in agreement. But I stammer. Go to bed, Austin, it's getting late, my dad says, walking away with my mother to their room and closing the door. A few weeks later, after a sermon, my sister, my brother and me are standing outside talking to a group of kids about meeting up later at the playground and playing Kill the Sinner when Father Williams walks up to us. Mary, can I talk to you in my room? He asks. Sure, Father Williams, she says excitedly. Father Williams, what do you want to talk to her about? I ask, trying not to sound suspicious. That's a private matter, Austin. Why don't you and Caleb run along now? He says, shooing us away. No, that's okay, Father. I think me and Caleb wanted to say a few quick prayers in the hall first. We did? Caleb said, confused. I elbowed him in the ribs, knocking the wind out of him momentarily. Yeah, dummy, come on, let's go, I say, shuffling him into the prayer hall that was right next to Father Williams' room. Father Williams took my sister into his room, and I knew I needed to stop it as soon as he closed the door. I told Caleb to stay put, and I would be right back. I went the boot and started banging on it. Father Williams opened it a crack just to let his head out. Austin, I told you that me and your sister need privacy for our chat, he said, annoyed. But Father Williams, I really need to talk to you. It's an emergency, I said, distraught. It can wait, son, it won't be long, he said, slamming the door in my face. I pounded and kicked on the door for minutes on end. I felt tears building up and I started crying, knowing that there was nothing I could do to stop this monster. Caleb came running to me, asking me what was wrong. Just then the door opened and my sister walked out in front of Father Williams, staring blankly with no expression on her face. The kind of look you see in old World War II documentaries of shell-shocked soldiers. She walked past me and Caleb without saying a word and out the door of the church. Caleb, I think it's your turn now. Would you like to play a little game with me? Father Williams looked at Caleb with a menacing grin on his face. Caleb smiled back and was about to speak when I pushed him away. No, Father, I think I want to play instead, I said, stone-faced, but trembling deep down, looking into Father Williams' eye beyond his sunglasses. Oh, do you now? Asked Austin. I'm so glad to hear. Why don't you come on in? Caleb, why don't you go run on home and we will have to play some other time? For now, me and Austin are going to play. Father Williams grabbed me by my shoulder and shuffled me into his room and closed the door behind him. I played his game with him. I lost. Walking home after I felt empty. Walking past all the same cookie-cutter homes that lined the main street, I felt alone, because no adult believed me. I felt scared because I could only do so much to protect myself and my siblings. And most of all, I was used by this wolf in sheep's clothing that had my family and every other family here fooled. Turning on our cul-de-sac, I walk up to my house and see my sister sitting on our front porch. It's late at this point, probably around 9 p.m. She just sat there staring off into the distance. I walk up to her and ask her if she was okay. He touched my privates, Austin, she said blankly. I walked inside, threw myself into bed and cried hard that night. Beatings and sexual abuse like this went on for years for all of the kids in the compound, with the parents brushing it off as child's overactive imagination, and the perfect Father Williams could never be capable of such a thing. Years later, I will always remember the day because I was 16, about to celebrate my 17th birthday the next day. Father Williams called an emergency meeting over in the intercom house. This has never happened before, and every family met together in the church. Confused banter between families encompassed the large room when, after a few minutes, the armed guards closed the doors entering the church and exiting. Father Williams exited his room with 4 more guards, 2 at each of his side, walking up to his podium. The room was silent. Brothers and sisters, I regret to inform you that the day that has been foretold that the armies of Babylon will invade our sacred land has come upon us, Father said in a booming voice. Murmurs among the crowd began and were quickly silenced with Father William's next statement. A Judas has been in our congregation the entire time and has told the armies of Babylon of our sacred land that we hold near and dear to our hearts, and I refuse to allow my children to suffer at the hands of this brutal army. I have prepared for all of us a final stance. My children believe me when I say I will gladly fight to the death with this army in the name of God. However, this is simply a battle that cannot possibly be fought when our innocent, young, beautiful children are at risk of being taken and have Lord knows what happens to them. Instead, I have prepared a message for these tyrant armies that you cannot take our children and our pride. We will go out with our heads held high, and we will not be afraid to join our Lord God in our new Canaan within his kingdom. Father Williams holds his arms up high and faces his head towards the ceiling. Women from the kitchen come and hand out paper cups with 2 pills each in them to all the members. God is ready for us. Do not be afraid, my children. I will see you all on the other side. Most people took their pills and helped their children take their pills as well. Some didn't and broke windows trying to escape. The guards shot the ones who did and forced others who were reluctant to take pills. When it came to my family, my mom and dad sat with smiles and helped my brother and sister take their pills. I know Caleb didn't fully understand what was going on, so he just went with what everyone else was doing. Mary really did believe in Father Williams, even after the abuse she suffered at his hands. As for me, I made up the excuse that I needed to pray before I took mine, and my parents happily allowed me to before saying, "See you on the other side, son," and downing their pills. Bodies started dropping and chaos was still ensuing. I watched as my family dropped and started convulsing and foaming at the mouth, wide-eyed and smiles on their face. I looked around, these other families were dropping in similar circumstances and other being gunned out. I was on my knees in prayer, praying to God to get me through this nightmare, praying that my family may enter the kingdom of heaven, and most of all praying that none of this was real. However, the last part of my prayer would go unfulfilled. The level of fear I had at this point was overwhelming. Should I run? Should I fight back? I lay down pretending to be dead among the chaos and prayed again that guards wouldn't notice that I was not actually dead and kill me. In the distance I hear police sirens and helicopters getting closer and closer. I open my eyes slightly to see everyone in the church dead, with some gunfire coming from the outside from the guards chasing down would be the escapees. The only person left alive in the church is me and the father. He picks up his Bible and starts heading towards the door. I stand up surrounded by the hundreds of bodies of men, women and children around me. The sirens and helicopters grow closer and the gunfire still rings throughout the night. I stare dead at the father and he stares back at me and smiles. He falls over the radio for some guards to church immediately. "You had a wonderful family, Austin. I'm sorry it has to be this way. I truly am," he says softly and mockingly with one hand over his heart. "Fuck you, you're the devil," I scream. "How wrong are you, sweet Austin?" he says smiling. "You're right, you're not the devil. You're a sad, disgusting excuse of a human being and you will be punished," I say with conviction. "You raped my sister, you raped me, and you killed my family. I look forward to the day I see you again and can inflict the pain you inflicted on so many people, whether it's in this life or the next." The guards burst through the church door and aim their weapons at me. I stare at the father one last time before simply saying, "Fuck you," and popping my pills. The world starts fading around me. The helicopter sounds right above me and the cops sound like they've breached the compound by now. I watch as the father laughs hysterically and opens up a hatchway next to his podium and he walks under it laughing and smiling at me as I fade to black. I woke up in the hospital 10 months later out of my coma. The doctors tell me I'm the only surviving victim of the mass suicide. Some SWAT team members died in a shootout with the guards before taking them all out. I asked if they found Father Williams and they told me no. Apparently he escaped through a tunnel system he had built and was now on the run, and is thought to have done the same thing at least 3 other cults. It just happens that this was the largest by far. I'm out of the hospital now after some time with therapists and changing my name to avoid the news from harassing me. I'm alone in this world. I lost my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, and my friends, but I try not to focus on those feelings. With all the trauma I experienced, I pretty much became numb and still haven't fully processed what happened. I can't focus on that now, though, because now I have a mission. This is a message to Steve Williams, or should I say Eric Bukowski. I know where you are. I know you're down El Dorado, Arkansas, at a small church preaching right now, recruiting new members to your congregation with your silver tongue. I know this because I've looked over every newspaper and news site online in America until I happened to come across your evil shit-eating grin waving to a crowd in a local parade, with your loyal brainwashed followers following behind you, posted in a small local newspaper. I'm on my way to you now, Eric, and I promise you in the name of God, I will kill you. So yeah guys, hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, leave a like, maybe even subscribe to show your support. And by the way, if you have an interesting story like this, make sure to leave it down in the comments, and if it's interesting enough, I'll even feature it in a future video. So have a good one. Peace.